Welcome back to the Kindness Kangaroo Library. I'm author Sandra Wilson, and this is a Storytime Lesson. I'm not reading a story today because we're working on writing one. And from now until Halloween, our segments will be devoted to writing a spooky story based on ideas from my newest book, Spooky Stories and How to Write Them, which is now available on Amazon. There'll be a link in the description below so you can get a copy for yourself and do more practice and more lessons on writing your own spooky story. In our last segment, we talked about characters and how we could take a spooky character that we already know and love and use those characteristics to create our own spooky character. Today we're talking about setting, where the story is going to take place. Now, sometimes it's a spooky setting like a haunted house or a graveyard, but sometimes it could be a regular setting that we make spooky because we've added spooky characters or a spooky situation. This is what we're going to talk about today. If you have a story in mind that already has a spooky setting, you go ahead and make notes about that, and we can use that in one of our later lessons when we start putting our story together. But for today's practice, I want you to think of a setting that's maybe not so spooky. Maybe it's a bedroom that has a monster in the closet. So the bedroom isn't that spooky, but once you add that monster, that spooky character, now we've made it pretty scary. Maybe it's a street, or a park. That isn't so scary, but once the dark hits, or the fog rolls in, or the thunderstorm happens, that situation makes that setting more scary. So think of those ideas while you're thinking today about your activity. I was at a store recently, a thrift store, and I found a painting of a cafe. It was a pretty empty painting. There was nothing in the windows and nobody in the chairs, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to make it a spooky setting? So I added some characters and some setting situations to make it a little bit more scary. And that's kind of what I'd like for you to do today. Think of an ordinary setting. Maybe it's a painting you have on your wall. Maybe it's somewhere you go every day, like school or work, the library, grandma's house, any of those regular, normal, non-spooky settings. And think of how you could add things to it to make it a bit spookier. Think of adding spooky characters, spooky situations, like weather changes, darkness. You could add chases, you could add suspense, you could add, mystery, and those things all kind of make your setting spooky. So take your idea of a setting, either find one in a book, you can turn some pages and find an interesting setting, go for a walk in your neighborhood and find an interesting setting, look on some paintings on a wall and see if there's an interesting setting. Go through your photographs or postcards and see if there's an interesting setting. The idea is to get an interesting setting and then think of how you could make it a spooky setting. So write down ideas of what kind of characters would come to that setting. Make it make sense. Why would a skeleton go to the library? If you have a good reason for that, then that's a perfect thing to include. But if you're not sure why a skeleton would go to the library, then that's not the right character to include. So think about those things when you're creating it. Don't just put it in there to make it spooky. It has to be part of the advancement of the story. When you're writing a story, when you add characters and you add situations, it's all about moving that story forward. So if it's just there, to decorate, it's a rat that just sits there and doesn't do much, it's not adding much to your story. So it's not important for our practice today. So pick out your simple setting and then add some ideas that will make your setting spooky. And then in our next video, we're going to talk about the situation. And once we have some practice on creating those things, we're going to have one more lesson on how to put it all together to create your story. All right, everybody, have some fun with your imagination and writing your spooky ideas, and we'll see you next time.